Welcome to Catalyze Your Creativity. It's going to be about how you can save time and money using open tools and resources. What does that really mean? We're going to be talking about copyright licensing, and how you can use those tools to make your work better and at the same time save money and save time. Sounds impossible, but it is true. My name is Darius Garza. I work at Chapter 3. I'm a designer. We have a team of 3. We take a pretty holistic approach to design. We all kind of have a role in everything, but we definitely have work that we are better at and that we specialize in. I'm more so on the marketing and branding, identity, the pretty pictures side of stuff. If I never saw a wireframe again, I would not mind that. God bless them, and I'm glad I know the process, but it's just not my niche. But each of us fulfill a certain role. So this whole, the entire speech will be online, slides after this. There's a pre-version of it, but I changed some stuff, so I'll have to update that. And the whole thing is Creative Commons, so do whatever you want with it. We'll talk more about that later. So let's get started. So here's every designer's dilemma, right? Talking about time, money, and quality, right? So normally a client only gets to choose from 2 of those things. They either have the budget for it to be good and fast. It's kind of like a higher end client. Like, we need this to be amazing and tomorrow. So you're probably going to put your best people on it, work all night, and they're going to pay for that, right? Of course. I hope so. They should. Or you'll have a client, maybe like a nonprofit, who you're doing work out of the goodness of your heart, or you got dragged into it, or you're addicted to volunteering, or whatever the case may be. It's going to be good work because you want to take pride in it. You want to be a reflection of your company's reputation, or of yourself, or maybe a portfolio piece. But it's probably not going to be your top priority, especially if you're working a full-time job. It's going to be something you're doing after hours, weekends, whatnot. So you're still going to be a good product, but they're not paying you much for it. So it's going to take a while. And then this, I think most clients kind of fall in the middle of, is this fast and cheap thing, right? They all want it yesterday, and no one has any money. Well, there's a trade-off there. That means you're going to get something just okay. And sometimes that's fine. It depends on the client and the task. We're not always making art. Sometimes we just have to get the job done. It's a very functional task. So it depends on the client and the type of work that you're doing. But what if we could have all of these things? What if it can be cheap, relatively quick, and pretty awesome, right? Maintain your integrity, regardless of the things going against you. And I think this little black hole in the center is completely feasible if you leverage open licensing, open source tools. It cuts your time in half. You don't have to worry about asking for permission. You don't have to buy things. You don't have to have a budget. It just kind of provides you with pretty decent, pretty awesome tools, and immediately. So right there, it takes care of the time and the money thing, so it just kind of leaves it up to you and your imagination to make that awesome. So this is just kind of a brief outline of what we're talking about that's broken up into 3 segments. First of all, it's why I care. How is this relevant to Drupal? And then it's going to be pretty academic. We're going to get pretty deep in the woods with this copyright licensing thing. It might feel a little bit like school, but trust me, it's not that bad. It's valuable information. I tried to simplify it as much as possible. And then at the very end is the good stuff, where I show you this treasure trove of amazing open tools and resources, this huge, vast sea of amazing things that you can leverage in your work and also contribute to eventually. So why am I here in the first place? It's because of Drupal. I blame Drupal for everything. Luckily, in design school, I had a crazy web design instructor, and they dropped Drupal on us. And they're like, here you go. I'm crazy myself, and I fell in love with it, hook, line, and sinker. To me, it was like drinking the Kool-Aid moment. Some people refer to that time when they discovered open source as this life-changing affirmation. You found this community, you found this passion, you found this dedication. Drupal was definitely my open source Kool-Aid. I never realized the power of it, and the effort that people and groups put forth to make it happen. I always kind of thought it was another word for shareware. Remember shareware? It's basically another word for virus. I haven't seen that shit in a while. But boy, was I wrong. It was the first time in my life that I didn't have to steal something. That was awesome. Broke college kid. I don't know a single college kid that paid for Photoshop, right? And they sure as hell ain't paying for anything else. So Drupal was a godsend, and I just, ever since that moment, I have not looked back on the whole open thing. So I wanted to see how far this rabbit hole went, so I spent a lot of time in grad school studying open culture, open licensing. This book was my doorway into this whole universe, and it just kind of fueled my passion for wanting to learn more, be more involved, just see how, how deep these weeds got. And so I started looking into the author's work. That's Lawrence Lessig. He is one of my heroes, a law professor at Harvard, one of the founders of Creative Commons, and also one of the founders of the Berkman Center for Internet and Culture, some research think tank thing where they study the internet, and then, I don't know, it's pretty awesome though. So he's just one of my favorite overachievers, still a big hero of mine. He sort of changed his focus from internet activism and digital civil rights over to US government and Congress. But still kind of in the same vein, like empowering the individual to live the lives that they need to live. And the third reason why I love open tools and resources is because I'm a serial volunteer, and I just can't get enough. I love being involved, but unfortunately in community projects, as most of you may know, you don't have a huge budget. You normally don't have a lot of time either. We're all probably working 1, 2, however many jobs, self-employed, then doing stuff on the side, God knows. But you still want to produce something that looks clean, professional, presentable. You want to create delightful experiences for individuals. How the hell are you supposed to do that if you don't have any money or time? Well, I have discovered that leveraging open photography, open iconography, all of this stuff, it just kind of speeds up my workflow to the point where I'm producing work that I'm just so proud of, and I think that other people have responded really well too. And I really do owe most of it to open licensing. Especially Creative Commons. So I do a lot of this work, and it has just been sort of a godsend for me. All right, so here's the fun part. Gonna just get dirty with copyright for a minute. We all probably have like a general idea of what copyright is, why we have it, how it works. We're not gonna get too deep into like the political philosophy of copyright, not too many of the microbial details. Just kind of a more superficial pass, and then so we have something to compare it to when we talk about licensing. First, the small print. You can all read that, right? I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. Blah, blah, blah. If you go out of business, etc., you can't blame me. It's got to be there. I don't, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, so but I'm sure it's helpful. So part 1 of the crash course, copyright means you make something. As soon as it's in a fixed form, you have idea to paper, not idea, but something that you've actually produced. The copyright magically comes out of the sky, at least in this country. There's no need to register it with the Copyright Office. You don't have to draw the R. You could draw a smiley face on a Post-it note, and that's technically copyrighted in its fixed form. I know it's weird. I swear that's how it is. But what does that copyright mean? It means that other people do not have the right to copy, modify, distribute, touch with a 10-foot pole without your permission. And unfortunately, nowadays, it also means you can't even consume a piece of intellectual property without permission of the original author. That's kind of new as of the 90s with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. That makes it illegal to circumvent things like digital rights management that prevent users from interacting with a certain piece of media. And preventing this hack somehow got conflated with intellectual property. So if you hack Netflix, they consider that like, I don't know why. It's kind of, it's a little weird. But so it's very strong. Basically, if you make something, you have absolute total domain over how society uses that. Derivative works are it's pretty literal. It's like if I have a piece of copyright and then someone else takes that and they remix it, they change the colors, they make something that has obviously been inspired by your copyrighted work. That also requires permission from the original author. So And this is where it gets kind of subjective. Ultimately, it's up to the judge to decide whether or not it's far removed enough to be considered a derivative work and how transformative that was and et cetera. But you got to be careful, because if two things do look alike, you could be in violation if the license did not permit you to do that. And then the derivation that you make, the remix, whatever, has its own copyright in addition to the original copyright. So they kind of exist independently of each other, but if they have certain licenses associated with them, they have to be compatible. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So this is an example of a super famous derivative work court case with Shepard Fairey, the Obama election. So the Associated Press claimed that Shepard Fairey took this picture, put it in Photoshop or whatever, and derived the shapes and the forms for his illustration from that. And Shepard at first said, no, there was no association between these images. And a lot of people defended him because, they say, well, it's transformative in the way that it's a photograph to an illustration. And Obama makes this face every day just to look smart. Like, how do we know it was that photograph? But the Associated Press wasn't having it. So they took it to court and they pled their case. And they're like, oh, you can overlap this. This is obviously inspired by this, et cetera. If you ask me, I would say that these are so far removed from each other, it's a ridiculous claim. Unfortunately, the court didn't rule that way, and then they said that Shepard was in debt to the original author of the photograph and violating their copyright and owed them royalties or whatever else their agreement was. But the moral of the story is that I think a lot of people would think that this was sort of an okay gesture to make from a piece of work to another. But that's always in the eyes of your lawyer and the judge. So fair use is a part of copyright. It's everyone's inherent civic right to have some access to any piece of copyrighted material that exists in our country. So a lot of times you hear about like educational uses being okay appropriation of content, or another common one is parody, because in a lot of ways that follows like the four tenets of when it's okay to appropriate something and when it's not. These are the four tenets right here. So why did you copy it in the first place? Did you copy it because you wanted to make money off of it? Or did you copy it because you were using it as an example to illustrate a point? And then the nature of the copyrighted work. What did you steal, or what did you appropriate? Was it a book? Was it a movie? Was it published? Was it free? It depends on the nature of the work that you're borrowing from, how they interpret the severity of that appropriation. And then, of course, the amount of work copied. Was it a 5-second clip? Was it the whole song, whole movie? That has a huge impact on whether or not it's considered fair. And then, of course, the financial impact of the situation. Did my appropriation prevent you from making money off of your copyrighted intellectual property? And then, if so, how much? And this even goes into long-term statutory cases where they're like, well, even though you didn't make $2 million, I could have made $2 million. So now you owe me $2 million. It gets pretty hairy. So if judges balance these things on scales and like, okay, yeah, it seems fair or not. It's just kind of like I said, there's precedents, but each case is unique. This is another popular example of fair use. Really popular was like a 90s cover shoot. It was in every grocery store. Like, I think this iconic image has been burned into our brains with Demi and Annie Leibovitz shot. And so it was a big pop culture item, and around the same time, the naked gun thing was kind of popular, and they sort of have the whole parody thing going on. And it was definitely catchy. It resonated with people. It was a familiar image, and it was funny. But Annie and Demi were not having it. They're like, this is very private. This is a personal shot. Like, it's obviously derived from that. The lighting is really similar, obviously, the shape and whatnot. And then Paramount argued that, well, no, it's different enough. Look at the difference in the rings. Look at his facial expression. Look at the overall shape of their bodies. They went on this whole tirade about how all the little minutiae are different, right? So how do you think this case went? Do you think that they sided with Demi or with Naked Gun?
Naked Gun with the corporation.
Sure did. Bingo. Must have had awesome lawyers. But that just goes to show you how subjective and fickle this is. So don't get too confident when it comes to your fair use rights, because you never know, and it really does matter the severity. Like, this is for a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign, but if you're making a copy for your own personal library, that's usually kosher. So this is the fun stuff, licensing. So licensing is the adjunct to a copyright. So you have your copyright, you have your work. We have a book, has a copyright. And the license is the permissions associated with that piece of property. So you're like, I've got this book, and I'm going to say everyone in the world can share it, they can copy it, but they can't change it. That would be a specific type of license. Another license, the Drupal license, the GPL license, it's not the Drupal license, but the general public license is like one of the most open and free that permits people to do just about anything that they want. You could put your name on it and say that you made it, as long as you said where it came from. And there's certain other stipulations. But essentially, it's a deal, it's a contract. It's a set of rules that make it easier for people to know how you want your copyrighted property to be consumed and distributed. I'm going to focus on Creative Commons, because I think that's most relevant in the design sphere of things. And we're pretty familiar with the GPL. I mean, it's really complicated, but I think a lot of us have worked with it with Drupal. And it's also very specific. The GPL is more of like a software license, whereas Creative Commons is more appropriate for all kinds of creative media, I guess. Not to say Drupal's not creative, but more visual, auditory. Again, it's a fine line. So I'm going to go into a little more detail about Creative Commons. So if copyright is all rights reserved, this Creative Commons license on top of that says some rights are reserved. This is still my property. However, I want you to know that there's certain things that you can do with it. At the very least, every single Creative Commons license says you are free to share, copy, distribute, and perform. Perform is one of those strange copyright tenets that's like if you were to do a cover of a song or play even music on the radio, you got to pay royalties for that. But with Creative Commons, that's already built in, so you don't have to worry about the royalties thing. And this is a little Easter egg in the Creative Commons licensing. You also can't put any DRM on any of the intellectual property because they see that as a barrier to the dissemination of that intellectual property, which is the whole point of Creative Commons in the first place. Whereas the GPL license does not come with that stipulation because the Stallman and folks believe that the GPL license should be so free that you can do whatever the hell you want with it. So if even that means destroying it with DRM, it's up to you. So I see both sides, but
GPL 3 specifically says it can't be used for DRM.
How recent is that? How recent is that?
Version 3?
Yeah.
6 years.
Okay. My last resource I was reading about said that they were incompatible because of that DRM discrepancy. So that's good to know.
GPL 2 potentially.
Okay, cool. Good, awesome, sweet. Well, learn something new every day. So Creative Commons has 6 licenses and technically 7. The 7th license is the public domain, which means you can take your copyright and essentially throw it away completely and say that you don't want any legal precedence or anything over it. It's just in the commons. It's a free-for-all. No attribution, nothing whatsoever. People can do whatever they want with it. Because otherwise, copyright in this country happens without your permission. So whether or not you like it, you're sort of married to that thing 70 years past death, unless you put a license on it. So starting from the first one and going over, I'd say the by stands for attribution, by whom. That's standard on every single Creative Commons license. No matter what, if you use a creative piece of work, you have to say who it came from and where. But that's still the most open and permitting. So that means that you can change it, you can sell it, you can do almost anything you want with that book, magazine, photograph, whatever, as long as you say where it came from. The next license is somewhat more restrictive. This is attribution, and then it is also no commercial use of this thing. So share it all you want, change it up, put it on Pinterest. I don't care as long as you don't make any money off of that, right? The next one is attribution, But this means that if you do a derivative work which holds its own copyright, it must also carry over the same exact license. Same way that the GPL works. If you change or modify, it has to always have the same license kind of throughout the family tree. That is a very similar thing here with Creative Commons. And then you sort of mix and match these different knobs or whatever. You just kind of tune in your control depending on the situation and your intent and the type of work. So the fourth one over here, attribution, non-commercial, share alike. So now we're just kind of combining these things, right? The next one, the equal sign, means share, distribute. You can even sell in a fixed form. Let's say I write a book, and you think you can typeset it better or make a better cover or whatever else. Well, actually, you can't change the cover. Actually, couldn't change the type either. So I could actually make a carbon copy of your book and sell it. That's fine, as long as I don't change anything, right? And the next one says, don't change anything, and you better not make a penny off of it. So that's the most restrictive license. Some people would call that the free advertising license. It's like the Pinterest license or whatever else. It basically says, yes, sure, you can share this on the web. I'm not going to sue you. But the second that you try to modify it or sell it, you're going to be in trouble. Whereas some people would call like some of the less restrictive ones free culture licenses. I think it's just kind of getting deep in the woods with the semantics there. I just kind of like to look at it as a spectrum of open. And it depends on the type of work you're doing and what your intent for sharing it is in the first place. So you can go online. There's a form you fill out on creativecommons.com. It's a really nice step through. They ask you question by question. I know this might seem kind of overwhelming, right? And like, how do I sort of balance all these things with my work? But they've made it surprisingly simple to sort of walk you through how to license your work. So it's really nice. So a copyrighted work is often not just one thing. Take like a book, for example, might have photographs, it's got poems, it's maybe got a foreword by whomever. So you have all these various chunks of intellectual property coming together to create one whole. That would be considered a derivation of the original work, and then once you combine all of these things into one new piece, that itself is copyrighted. But before all of these things can be married, you have to make sure that every single licensed item that you're using is compatible. So you couldn't, if a piece wasn't licensed at all, if it was all rights reserved and you tried to drop that in there and you had an exclusive deal with the author and everything else was Creative Commons, you could not construct that work without that one person's permission. Otherwise, you'll have a big hole ultimately, or some legal troubles down the road. I'll have an example. I think a website is a really great example of a multimedia piece, various copyrights coming together. This is a project I recently worked on, the May Day Super PAC. It's another project, and thank you so much. I noticed that you were tweeting away. Every dollar counts, guys. We're still taking money. Shameless plug. So this is a whole conglomeration, and you can't really see it, actually. Let's see. So there's this banner part on the top, and that has a texture, right? Let's see. Let's go to the next one. So the top banner there, that's a texture that I got from subtlepatterns.com. Really awesome resource for all Creative Commons licensed subtle textures. They're really nice. And of course, we're working with Larry Lessig. This whole project has to be Creative Commons. So it's challenging, right? The whole thing was coded by my brilliant friend Aaron. Like, this is all custom. There's no CMS. It's kind of amazing. So we got to license it how we needed to. So copyright number one is this subtle texture, which you can't see on the screen, but it's extremely subtle. And then we have another copyright over the actual font. So a fun fact, type letters, letter forms, are not actually copyrighted, but it is the software in which they are encapsulated that is copyrighted. So essentially, if you trace these and rescan them and put your own damn software on top of them, it wouldn't be a violation of copyright unless you circumvented the firewall on front of the software that prevents you from getting to the back end, because then it's a violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So don't even worry about it. Just consider it copyrighted. Right? So the font itself is Merriweather. It's an excellent typeface. It's handsome and elegant and pretty competent for a totally free and open font. So that's 2 open licenses. OFL is allegedly compatible with Creative Commons licenses because you can't put DRM inside of a font software. Is this true? Inside of a font? I don't know. Someone told me that it's not possible, but I mean, can't you do anything with software? All right, well. And then another copyright is not the type, but these little icons that I got from, what is that site? Icon. Font Awesome. Yes. So even these tiny little stars, there's copyright protection behind those, and you have to make sure that you're not using something that does not permit you to combine it with other creative works. So this is like a whole string, right? It just keeps going and going and going. There's a lot of things to balance to have an honest, holistic, open product at the end. And this little video here itself is it's a fixed work. It carries its own copyright and then thus its own license again. So there's like 5 different components here. Oh wait, there's another one. This, of course you can't see it. You could see it better on the last slide. See a little fuzzy, like blurry flag action going on? That's another Creative Commons license piece that you gotta account for somehow. So all of these little elements have to be in concert with each other. Otherwise, you're gonna have some gaps in your final work. And then, last but not least, it's almost invisible, the code has its own copyright. Normally, we were used to that being GPL, but because this was a custom gig, we went with Creative Commons. Some people argue that GPL is more appropriate for code, but this is just a one-off anyway. We're not distributing this really, so. And it fit our needs pretty well. So that's licensing in a nutshell. I know I threw a whole lot at you, but I hope you get the general idea of what's going on. So kind of switching gears here, still on the crash course. Work for hire. That means if you are an employee of an agency or a place, not a contractor, I have no idea how you legally determine between the two. Anyone know? Contractor, employee, like, yeah, it's, yeah, huh.
There's a whole bunch of things that are changing it, but 5 years ago, like if you had to show up at a certain place at a certain time, they provided the tools and all of that, you were an employee.
Oh, where? Okay.
Now it's expanding that if you're providing essential services, like if a business could not function without you, then additionally you're an employee even if you're off Hawaii on your own computer.
Kind of fuzzy then, almost, right? Of course, all of this is. Law is a very soft science art thing. It's pretty malleable. It works mostly on precedents. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the books, but it's always changing and up for interpretation. And you know, it really makes a difference how good your lawyer is, basically. So if you are an employee, technically, whatever the hell that means, I'm sure it varies by state or by job even. Every single piece of work that you produce, whether it's photos or web code, whatever, by default, that's automatically your employer's. Unless otherwise stated in your contract, just by default, your company owns your shit and you have absolutely no right to it. Not even the right to put it in your portfolio unless they say that somewhere. So be careful with the work for hire thing. Always read your contract.
I believe you have to actually assign that permission to an employer.
I'm under the impression that it automatically goes.
No, you have to sign a slip saying that everything that you create while you're under the employment of that employer belongs to that employer. If you don't sign that, he does not own your stuff.
As a contract.
As a contractor.
No, as an employer. As an employee,
Well,
you have to...
you have a contract, but that does not have to be in your contract, from what I understand. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer.
I've actually had to sign saying that they could...
I could certainly be mistaken. From my experience, this is how it's worked. So you very well may be right. The moral of the story is read your contract, right? Like every last word makes a difference, and it means a lot.
Restate things that are already implicit in the law just to be safe.
Absolutely, yeah, because you never know how the words that you don't say can be twisted and used against you. So it's not sexy, it's boring, it's convoluted. Phone a friend. But really take the time to take control of your contract. And contracts are up for negotiation. Don't feel like you're obligated to sign that thing. You're like, no, this is a starting point for discussion. And if there's things you're not comfortable with, you throw that thing back and forth until you're both happy with the relationship that you're signing off to. So a little bit of employee empowerment. So we're going to reel it in here. This is right before the resources section. Let's see how I'm doing on time. All right, cool, we're good. So common myths, I think these are fun to learn from. It's interesting to see what people assume from things, and it's good to learn that some of these things aren't true. I often hear that people say, well, I gave them credit. I put these samples in my song, and I put their name in bold red, and it's fine, right? Or I took this photograph, and I watermarked it with the... No, there's no, it doesn't matter. You could put their phone number and address and their photograph on it. It doesn't matter. That's unauthorized usage, distribution, and modification of someone's intellectual property. So don't waste your time. I mean, it doesn't matter unless it's a Creative Commons thing, and then you have to give attribution. But without that license, you're just spitting into the wind. Doesn't matter. And I also hear that all educational use is, yeah.
Quick question. Going back to your site, the mayday.us.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you pulled a lot of that from Creative Commons, right?
All of it, yeah.
Okay, so where's the attribution on the site?
I think there's a credits thing. There should be. Is it at the bottom?
I didn't see it.
The site is also in shambles at the moment. It's a rapidly evolving project with a lot of hands across the country. So if it's not in there, there's definitely someone needs to know about it.
It says you own Mayday Pack.
I don't know.
Some rights reserved.
Yeah, but that's not attribution. So there should be a link in there somewhere buried.
The credits page on the About page, it's in the right column.
Oh,
Thank you.
It's not on the page.
That site is a labyrinth. I just did the home page thing.
Who actually gives credit when it's required is an open question in some cases.
What's that?
What qualifies as giving credit is a debatable point in some cases.
Ideally, if you're a Boy Scout about it, you want to give the copyright year of the author's name, the location of that, and then the license by which it was authored. That's ideal. Attribution is a bitch, you will find out. If you use open tools and resources, there's a trade-off. Sometimes it is easier to pay for things. Other times it's not. I think attribution is crucial, though. I mean, that's kind of what keeps these gears moving. But you will soon learn that, well, you just wish you could throw money at someone and have it all be over. It's not that easy. But I would be seriously surprised if the Mayday site didn't have attribution, since it's sponsored by a lawyer. So I'd be kind of shocked. Yeah.
Is it acceptable to have attribution just in the code? I know there's a lot of comments.
It's very vague, honestly. Like they say, have it near, have it on top of. You can, as the author, specify exactly how you want that. So you could say, put attribution in the metadata, if you'd like. And it also depends on the nature of the work. So if it's music, you can put it in the liner notes. You can put, the expectations are kind of soft, and it also depends on the type of intellectual property that you're talking about. Cool. So the educational thing, it's not true. It depends on the intent of your educational purposes. If you are one of those fly-by-night online universities and you're trying to build money out of gullible students and you're appropriating textbooks that you didn't pay for, that's a clear misuse of intellectual property to profit off of something that was not yours. But if you take a photograph and use that in a course pack and use that information as a reference or as like a tool to explain a point, that is an educational case where you've transformed that work, you've taken it out of its original context, and you're using that to elaborate on a point. So within that context, that would be fair. This free is open thing, this open is free thing, that's funny. I just had a talk with Kevin O'Leary about how they sort of had to backpedal a little bit with a project they were working on. The designer they were working with thought that free meant open. You can do anything you want with it. This was a distribution for Drupal, which means it had to be GPL, which means all of the components inside of there, remember that the modular matrix thing, have to be intercompatible. So they just throw away all that free, beautiful stock photography. I'm sure it was gorgeous. And they had to actually pay someone to illustrate these things and then license them and then go through all the motions. So beware, just because something is free, you didn't pay anything for it, you never know what lies beneath the surface, especially if there's no license on it whatsoever. At any point in time, the original author could just snatch that work back, and you could be in a really awkward place. So I think it's actually kind of tyrannical to give things away for free without telling people what the deals of that situation really are. And then people think that copyright needs to be registered before it exists or before you can collect money for that work. And no, it's seriously black magic. It comes out of nowhere. You don't have to do anything. Copyright's just there. I don't know why. It was not always like that. All right, so for the last half of this, I think I have about 10 examples, kind of run through these quickly, of places where you can find cool free shit. And I use these literally every single day. And it allows me to perform miracles, I swear. This is a really nice tool provided by Creative Commons themselves. It's like a meta search engine that's geared towards finding licensed material. You have a whole array of different websites, YouTube, Flickr, SoundCloud, what have you, that this library keeps building. You can do a similar thing with Google, but you got to go into advanced settings, and it's kind of convoluted sometimes. This is a really straightforward, easy way to find open materials with very clear language, too. These licenses were made to be human readable. They all come with a deed that sort of summarizes what you're doing. So if you need to find a song and a picture real quick, this is kind of one of the first places that I go. And if you just go to the Creative Commons site or just Google Creative Commons search engine, it'll take you here. And I think, yeah, that's also the URL. I put the URL on top of all these resources. One of my absolute favorite resources is the United States government, believe it or not, right? They have all the money, they have all the talent, and the best equipment. And believe it or not, any piece of work, intellectual property, created by an official US government employee is not subject to copyright, which means you can do anything. It's completely in the public domain. No copyright ever existed. That's because our tax dollars are going into the production of that. I'm surprised that it's that way, but hey, sometimes the government does work for the people. So you could literally take a photograph of a rocket, put your name on it, sell it, make it put whatever you want. It's kind of amazing. This website's a nightmare. I suggest you look through their Flickr. They also have a Flickr stream, and 99% of that stuff is also open, public domain. Yep.
Do you know if that also applies to state government, or is that only federal?
That's a good question. I've only focused on federal. I'll let you know. Oh, good question. Of course, this website's a complete disaster to navigate, though, right? So another alternative is the Bureau of Land Management. Some of the most stunning. Who loves stock photography? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So never buy stock photos again. This is some of the most stunning, mouth-dropping, gorgeous shit I've ever seen in my life. Their Instagram feed is amazing. Just rip shit from there all day. Their Flickr is gorgeous. Don't bother with their website. Of course, it's a nightmare from hell. But if you need jaw-dropping, stunning landscape photography, never pay another cent for that shit again. They also have multiple feeds for different parts of the country. There's like 3 or 4 different Flickr channels just full of this huge treasure trove of gorgeous, high-definition BLM photography ready for your taking. Anything you want. Put your name on everything and sell it. Doesn't matter. It's yours. And then just the more generic, Flickr Commons is also a really fun place to go poking around. It's definitely a rabbit hole, rat's nest situation. It's not really browsable. It's more search-based. But you know you're in a safe place. If you go to flickr.com/commons and you don't deviate outside of there, you'd be surprised what you can find in there. But it's definitely a shit show sometimes. But it's kind of cool stuff, right? I just took a screenshot, and I think the search query was modern. It's not the most modern thing, but who knows? You get the point, right? And then the Wikimedia Commons. Again, really awesome shit. This is starting to look a little more stock photo-y, but still way better, and you didn't pay $200 for it, right? And it's immediate. You don't need client approval to comp this thing up, whatever else. You have an idea, you get your work going, speeds up your workflow, and you didn't pay. See, save time, save money, beautiful work. It's all coming together, right? The Noun project. So before there was Font Awesome and all these like cute hipster ways of putting icons everywhere, there was the Noun project, which was, I think, someone's graduate school thesis endeavor, where they wanted to create like the world's largest open repository of free and easily accessible basic iconography. And this has exploded into a huge community of hundreds of designers who are actually making money. It's technically free, Creative Commons everything, to use these icons however you wish. But if you pay like a monthly $5 subscription or like $2 an icon or whatever else, you can skip the attribution part and just use them at will. So people have actually found that it's easier for companies to just pay for it rather than having to babysit the attribution. So professionally, these designers are making money off of putting stuff into the commons. So it's a really nice balance between people who maybe can't afford these things and don't mind doing the attribution, and others who would rather just pay the money but have quick access to something else. It's a really gorgeous website too. This is probably one of the sexiest open source resources on the web. Very Swiss, very Helvetica, super sexy. It's a fun site to poke around. And then here's Font Awesome, which I use more frequently now. Developers love it. It's light, it's easy, it's pretty standard. They have all of the icons you need, so you're not fishing around for, where's my mail flag, or where's my star, or whatever. It's just kind of like the basic fundamental stuff, all in one nice package, little CSS magic, and you've got icons all over the place. I don't know the license on this guy. It's definitely, I think it's as free as possible. I don't know if it's Creative Commons or OFL. I think it might be open font license, actually, which it's totally open. So let's see. So in another place to find fonts is Font Squirrel. This is sort of a hodgepodge of various licenses. So everything from the open font license, the most permitting, to which you don't need attribution or you can do derivatives of, from everything to like the most restrictive Creative Commons license that doesn't allow you to use it for commercial purposes or set certain restrictions on the amount of users that you can use. So I've actually gotten in trouble poking around the site, not reading my licenses. Be careful if some say over 20,000 users and you have a problem. Some say whatever metric. So don't be fooled that free is open. Again, this is a nice situation where these stipulations are not what you may expect. So be careful, it's not exactly a safe place. They're all open in some way, they're all free to access to a certain extent, but some are definitely more open than others.
Question?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at fonts there, right?
Yep.
So that Fear of Sans, just a very particular question.
Which one?
Fear of Sans, right? That looks very much like Fruitiger, okay?
Sure.
So do you think, would I have responsibility for the Fear of Sans being a ripoff of Fruitiger?
Well, no, you can't copyright letter forms. So unless someone can prove that they hacked the software to get through to those letter forms and then just basically wrap them in a new software shelter, absolutely not. No, you can copy those letter shapes all day. Yeah.
So if there were a problem, it wouldn't be mine?
No. No.
Then my other question was from before. Are PNGs of fonts copyright protected, or are they not?
Again, the letter shape is not, right? It's an interesting question, but there's software around that, right? Like PNG itself?
Yeah.
I don't know. What would be an example of a PNG font?
That's why I'm not advocating for.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is all about like finding your way through this forest, right? Like, and if there's a resource out there for you to use it, you might as well.
Similar to print issues as fonts.
What would be an example of a PNG font?
It never mattered because the printer would always take the font, and then there was no tracing on it because it was just ink on paper at that point.
And it was metal, right?
But with the web, it's different because it's a piece of software that's making the font.
Right,
So
and that's what's protected.
Right. So that's why we're in a whole other realm.
I'm wondering, I'm not assuming that's correct, but
when I think of making a graphic using a font, like you're in Photoshop, you're not necessarily using a web font to create that. You're using a regular font that you would have used back in the day just to print.
What do you mean to create a font?
What's that?
You said to create a font?
No, to create a graphic, and the font is in that.
Right. No, I mean, that's protected.
Because you have to buy.
You got it, right. It's like, how did you get that, right? Where did that come from? Unless...
To own a copy of those fonts.
Right.
That's why when you go send something to a magazine, you have to give them a copy of the font to be able to use it. So there are rights around that, and I don't know if that goes.
Well, I still don't know what a PNG font. What did you mean?
Well, I'm saying, like, instead of using the font like as a vector, you're using, it's a vector on the website. You're taking the font. You want to use the.
Oh, you rasterize it.
Right, you rasterize it. Yeah.
Oh, right. But you have to have rights to do that in the first place. Yeah. There you go. We figured it out. So be careful here. It's a great resource, but I'm going to show you one that's better, I think, because it's super safe. You can't go wrong, Google Fonts, and they're just getting better all the time. They just released a new version of Roboto, which is like the standard Android font. They really cleaned it up. It's pretty amazing, actually. It's a huge type family, super versatile. This is also one of my favorite typefaces lately, the one that I've used throughout the presentation. Source Sans Pro, which is Adobe's first venture into open source anything that I'm aware of, and it's really nice to see the big boys getting involved. So Google Fonts, do whatever you want. It's a total playground. All the same open license. I don't really think you could mess it up. So it's definitely a safe spot. Let's see, do we have anything else? Yeah, so one more example. And Behance is a designer portfolio community thing. Not everything on here is Creative Commons, but as part of your registration process, they offer you the opportunity to license the work that you're showcasing with one of the Creative Commons licenses, which is amazing, because this is a super popular, really trendy, attractive website that's popularizing this idea of open licensing. And they have thousands of members and users, and it turns out that 75% of them have utilized some sort of Creative Commons license, which is just fantastic. There's beautiful work, really professional stuff, and it's nice to see designers lightening up a little bit. Maybe not quite as much of a competition, but more of a community. So this is kind of cool. It's changing the design paradigm piece by piece. So those were my 10 examples. Just going to finish up with one more of my inspirations and heroes. I'm all about heroes. Aaron Swartz, hacktivist extraordinaire. He was also one of the founders of Creative Commons when he was like 15. Ridiculous. With Lessig and others. He was working on the RSS framework when he was 13. I mean, this kid is just nuts. He never stopped. And this is just one of my favorite sentiments from Schwartz. So what is the most important thing in the world that you could be working on right now? And if you're not doing it, why? It's just a fantastic motto to always ask yourself, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And could I be pushing myself further? And I think by utilizing these open tools and resources and kind of evangelizing them to the rest of the world, we're sort of changing the culture and the dynamic and how we look at intellectual property. So I think that pretty much is awesome. So these words sort of resonate with me, and he's been an awesome inspiration. That is it, folks. There is your mini law lesson of the day. Any questions? I know it's been a long day, but I'm here for you. Green in the back.
What about the MIT license, the BSD license, the WTF?
Yes, there's a lot.
How do they relate? Are they compatible with Creative Commons?
I would actually have to look. There's a whole spectrum of open, and each of them has their own stipulations. Like we were saying earlier, the general public 2.0 said DRM is fine, and now it says it's not. So these things change every couple of years too. So you'd have to double check. There's so many licenses, and there's hundreds and thousands maybe. It's ridiculous. If you Google it, and even just for font licenses, there's hundreds. Really? But any one of us could make a license if we wanted to. I wouldn't suggest it without a lawyer. It's not a good idea, but you're more than welcome to do so.
Just contribute 2 more sites to your collection.
Yeah.
Pixabay.
Okay, cool. What's there?
3 images, really high quality stuff.
Wonderful.
Use. And the other one is freeimages.com.
Okay. Are those free or open license?
The way it reads is, put your stuff here for exposure for free, and you let everybody use it.
Is there anything about licensing though? You see, that's where it gets kind of sticky.
It doesn't show anything.
Because you could just change your mind at any time. It kind of leaves that gray area where free is not always open, and then you couldn't use those things in certain contexts without knowing exactly the nature of the work.
It says it's CC0.
Oh, wow, that's public domain.
Yeah.
So 0 copyright. That literally is a free-for-all. That's the best one, really. You ain't got to worry about shit.
Flickr.com comments. I've seen a few websites that I've checked out where this one in particular, I'm not sure if it's Flickr that they get their privileges for or Tumblr, or it's one or the other, and they're old photographs.
Sure.
But they do stipulate that we couldn't find any copyright. If anybody knows, please let us know.
We call those orphan works. Yeah. Oftentimes, it depends on the nature of the orphan work. Often they just go left and dissolve into the ether because people are afraid of the repercussions that could possibly come from those things. So you got to give them credit for putting that out there. We don't know exactly where this came from. But unfortunately, if it's a big corporate client and they're like, oh, hell no, they'll throw a team of attorneys on you so fast and have your head spinning. You'll be like 20 grand in debt. So it's kind of a gray area. You never know. But not all that stuff's old, too. I mean, there's like the BLM stuff, and that's high def and gorgeous and very clear what the licensing is. So it's a spectrum, totally.
If you're releasing something and you do want people to use it, do absolutely put a license on it prominently. If you don't, then by law, no one else is allowed to even look at it because copyright law is that nutty.
Yeah.
Also, if you have a photograph and there's someone in it, think about model releases.
If you're not in public, right?
Yeah. If you take a picture of somebody and you then put a Creative Commons license on it,
right,
the person you're taking a picture of may not approve.
They have to consent to that, right?
And I'm not entirely sure what the law is in that situation. It varies depending on all kinds of crazy details.
Well, yeah, like the property of the distribution of the self is some kind of other, it's a whole other animal.
I know there was a case where some artist had taken a picture of this young girl. She was fine with it, whatever, just at some school event, and he had put it on Flickr, Creative Commons,
right,
photographer, yep, and some company website then used it, which means now this little girl at a school has her pictures on a website being seen by a million people a day.
Yep.
And is that legal? Is that not? Is it ethical? I don't know what the court's ever said on that.
Was that the Virgin Mobile case? Because it's a very similar case. This one seems a little more specific with this school thing. I'm not sure, school.
I don't recall the actual details of it.
Well, the location makes a big difference.
Yeah, it is.
Because if that was at the park, it may not be moral, but that's within your intellectual property rights to do whatever you want with that. You don't need clearance for that. So
if you're taking pictures that have people in them, think that part through.
Totally. Assume that you need permission.
Yeah.
Right? Unless you have a lawyer on retainer. It's always better to be more cautious with this stuff than not, especially when you're dealing with high-profile clients. There's a lot of money passing hands. That's when people start noticing this stuff. You may think, well, I go through all this trouble, right? No one knows I'm doing this. Well, one day they will be watching you. Depends on the project. Yeah?
I know a lot of projects there's a growing need for, say, being HTML5 and video or things like that. I found one site for that called mozwai.com.
Okay.
That's for basically stock video. Do you know of any other stock video sources?
Stock? That's tricky. Yeah, not just amateur stuff, huh?
It looks pretty professional to me.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Flickr would have some. Flickr does video, right? YouTube has.
You can plan YouTube videos as Creative Commons.
Yeah.
Pretty easy.
Yeah, any repository on the web, it's all compatible with licensing that, and it goes inside of the metadata. That's a little more technical, and I even understand how that works.
I'm not thinking of embedding. I'm thinking of well, if you go to mazwai.com, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Try the search tool, the first example I gave, and then pick one of those that has video, and then your stipulations, commercial, non-commercial, derivatives, etc. Yeah, poke around, probably find something. Up here?
Derivative work clarification.
Yeah.
My understanding previously with derivative works was that you actually only copyright on the delta of the work that you did, and not actually, and that's actually what creates the second copyright. But you do not own anything around the original work itself, and therefore, if you were to basically like,
they are separate, right?
Yeah, they're still separate, but your actual ownership is on the things that you changed.
No, the whole kit and caboodle. So let's say you took a photograph of someone, right? You chopped half of their face off and you superimposed it with your dog. So now you have the original photograph with one copyright, and now you have the hybrid photograph. Two separate things, right? The one that you hybridize is its own entity, which is why you need permission from the original author.
I'll give an example. I mean, this is a different context, but the example that I gave, I run a literary magazine, and we have a no derivatives clause in the license that we have. And the example that we use is we have a fiction writer who writes a story and publishes that in our magazine, which is online. Anyone can take that story and put it, because it's under a Creative Commons license, and put it on their own blog or website, as long as they attribute it both to the author and to the magazine. But what we want to protect a fiction writer from is someone deciding they're going to write a screenplay based on that story and then sell that screenplay. That's a derivative work, and that's the primary instance why we have that sort of clause.
You still have that patchwork of copyrights, though, right?
I guess my point is that you get issues with fair use and parody.
Yeah, you sure do, and that holds up too.
You could change something in parody, like the Naked Gun thing was the way I read it previously was more of a parody law that they basically said because they did it in parody of Annie Leibovitz's original work, it falls under fair use.
It's a
little
parody is a little deeper.
Bit more, yeah. I'm just saying it becomes a little bit more in a fair use play than it does
Absolutely.
a derivative work play. So,
well, no, it's still a derivative work of a copyright. However, you didn't need to license it first.
Yeah.
So,
then it's a question of what actually you own. If you own the full work, then you could potentially make a derivative work of a parody under fair use by removing one person's hair and changing their hair color.
It depends on the nature of the work, what your intent is, how much money is being pressed hands. It's always this balancing act, right?
The major point I'm trying to make is it's a huge gray area, and that a lot of times it's not until laws are actually instated by a judge saying this is the way this should work, that you actually know for a fact whether this is going to work or not. So
you're absolutely right.
You want to make sure that you're as protected as possible. You get those model releases, you get everything you can, and you have the understanding of what attributions you have for whatever.
Some attorneys will even suggest just not going with it. It might cost you more to try to settle than to take that chance.
Oh. Mm-hmm. I
just wanted to mention quick that the Drupal Creative Commons module is really good. I mean,
at one point, what does it do?
Well, it adds meta tags that mean that search engines more accurately understand what the licensing is in the page.
Okay.
And so I worked with a project earlier, and we worked with them a little bit to kind of make sure that the tags were correct for audio, I think. And
so
they
virtually
were really helpful.
right? And then you take those tags and then throw them through the module, I guess? And
Well, yes, it adds radio buttons inside the content editing screen. So you say, I want this license, or this one, and then the config page you can pick out.
So it's on the spot licensing. That's sweet.
Yeah, it's really nice, actually. It works very well.
I like
if
it.
you have a lot of users, you can they can select their stuff themselves.
There's a module for that.
Yeah, so
that's a good
really
one.
Good
I like that. That should be in this presentation for this, right? Thank you. Over here?
Memes and copyright.
There's issues there. I mean, you know, you can lean on parody, but it's not a guarantee again. I mean, and maybe that meme was created from creative materials to begin with. Maybe it was public domain. Maybe it was your own. Every part of that meme, it's a collage. You have to, every part of it. Yep, you do.
Well, this gets into other discussions around whether or not you're actually going to get sued or not. It takes a lot for someone to actually want to actually go through and sue somebody for a meme. I mean, like, you know, there's a risk level involved in everything, right? You know, driving down the street. So you have to question whether or not the thing you're doing is actually what risk you're taking by doing it.
Really depends on like how profitable your appropriation is. At the end
a
of the
great
day.
example that I have is a user group that used to run on Drupal. It was a Risk board game user group. Got in trouble by Hasbro because they used the Risk logo, but yet other groups has run everyone after for other user groups of other own properties because they're actually starting to make money.
Oh,
They're
yeah,
actually starting to make, you know.
Right, and that's an IP issue.
exactly.
However, it's trademark, which is its own beast, but very similar. Yeah, it's, I mean, yeah, it's.
The likelihood of them going after you is small until somebody decides to pay attention and you piss somebody off or something else.
And people notice when money starts passing
Yeah,
hands.
exactly.
That's all it takes. Anything else? Yeah, over here.
I'd just like to say, on the trademark issue, the law actually exacerbates trademark litigation because you're forced to defend your trademark, and if you let people use it, then that can, even if it's for a good cause or a good purpose or
you're obligated to.
Right. If someone else goes and rips off of your trademark in a way that actually isn't good, maybe making an imitation of what you have, it's harder to defend it because they can say, well, look at all these other groups that watered down your brand,
Right.
watered down the trademark. So trademark is
It's a trifecta: the patent, the trademark, the copyright thing. That's why I've specialized just in copyright. I'm completely ignorant about patent and trademark. I mean, I know a little bit, but it's every single one is its own ecosystem.
I think that's the same reason why Amazon did the, I don't think it was a trademark, it was a patent on their photography technique.
Oh, yeah, right?
Same reason.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's Amazon. What do you expect, right?
Same reason Kleenex soup or
On trademark, that's why Drupal trademark, even if you're using it in a way that supports Drupal, you nominally need to get a license for it. The license for it is free in many cases.
Oh, cool.
And it's even like almost automatic, but if you're going to be doing anything...
Do you know what the process is?
Go to Drupal.com. It says there.
.com?
Drupal.com.
Okay, not word.
Drupal.com exists specifically to host the Drupal trademark licensing
cool.
information.
Love it.
So, disclaimer, I used to be the Director of Legal Affairs for the Drupal Association. I helped reset up the rules around it.
Oh, sick. I love it. First-hand info. Very good.
And second one, just on copyrights, just so you understand how screwed up copyright is in this country, under strict reading of copyright, forwarding an email is a felony.
Oh yeah, using the internet is illegal, actually. Because every time something shows up on your screen, it's an unauthorized replication of a piece of intellectual property. Anything. So we are all criminals, guys.
So if you have ever forwarded an email, it is copyrighted because it is fixed in a medium, you can stitch it up, and you are reproducing it and redistributing it without the express
The
consent.
system is broken and they use it against us.
So just when you have copyright, bear that in mind. Assume paranoia because that's
Assume the worst.
Yeah.
Back there?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's very important that you mentioned was make sure that you have a good attorney.
Hell yes. And good friends of attorneys.
The argument basically is interpretation of understanding and intention. And if your attorney, even if you're 100% in the right, you could end up losing.
You told me up.
Yeah, you've got a weak attorney. You have to have someone who.
Oh, God bless America. All right, guys. Well, it's been a long day. I'll let you out of here. Thank you so much for coming. This was a lot of fun.